Hello, my name is Kat, and I'm one of the admins with Two Households of Fair Corona, and I love the Shakespeare history plays. If you happen to be jumping into reading one of them for the first time, or you just want a refresher, you're in luck. Today I'm going to give a brief introduction of Henry VI Part 2, including catching you up on the story so far. Admittedly, if this is your first history play, it can feel a little bit like jumping into Season 5 of Game of Thrones, without having seen Seasons 1 through 4. Well, that's not a coincidence, because the 87-year period chronicled in these 8 history plays of Shakespeare's bring to life the 100 Years' War and the War of the Roses, periods from which George R.R. Martin actually drew his inspiration for his epic miniseries. My goal today is to help you get a sense of who's who and what's what, so when we read the plays together, it will be more familiar to modern audiences. Keep in mind that because the history plays can cover huge spans of time, this one takes place over 10 years, Shakespeare sometimes compresses, deletes, or even alters the history to make the story flow more smoothly. In Henry VI Part 2, as ambition and greed prey upon justice and honor, we'll see rousing speeches, especially from the women, plots within plots, peppered with portents and prophecies and pirates, and a passionate love scene between Queen Margaret and her lover, the Duke of Suffolk. And as rioters storm the nation's capital in a deeply divided country, in Act 4, you'll see parallels to modern-day politics that may strike a little too close to home. All this is underlined by the question of who is or should be controlling the throne, and will justice prevail? Let's take a look first at where we are in the story so far. Henry VI Part 2 was believed to be the first history play Shakespeare wrote, although in the grand scheme of things it sort of falls into the latter part chronologically. Scholars do tend to view these 8 plays as 2 tetralogies, or 2 groups of 4. The first such set of 4 plays includes King Richard II, King Henry IV, Parts 1 and 2, and King Henry V. These highlight the rise of the Lancaster branch of the Plantagenet family, as descended from King Edward III. During these plays, King Henry IV will usurp the throne from King Richard II, and then Henry IV and his son Henry V will try and keep it from the rightful heirs, while also gaining lands and territories, and sometimes brides in France. Meanwhile, we'll also see a huge transformation from a disgraceful son to a king who truly understands nobility. The next 4 plays, which are King Henry VI Parts 1, Parts 2, and Parts 3, and then also King Richard III, will cover the downfall of the Lancastrians and the loss of territories in France, the rise of the York kings, including Edward IV, and his younger brother Richard III, who kills his way to the top. Both of them are also descendants of Edward III from the first set. Lastly, we'll see the merger of the 2 houses of York and Lancaster, and we'll see the rise of the Tudor dynasty when the long-banished heir Henry Tudor defeats King Richard III, who desperately wishes for a horse. So on to our story. Shakespeare was born in the year 1564. Henry VI Part 2 opens about a century earlier in the year 1445 with the coronation of Henry's new bride, the beautiful but ambitious 15-year-old Margaret of Anjou. Immediately, we hear shocking news. Not only did Margaret arrive without a dowry, but the Earl of Suffolk traded away Maine and Anjou, 2 key, hard-won territories in France, to secure Henry's new bride, who Suffolk also happens to be sleeping with. An oblivious, besotted, and politically naive King Henry VI doesn't mind the loss of land, and immediately promotes Suffolk to Duke on the spot. Meanwhile, Margaret teams up with Suffolk and Somerset, and the Duke of Buckingham, and Henry Beaufort, the Cardinal of Winchester, and even Richard, the Duke of York, a rival claimant to the throne, to get rid of her rivals, especially the Duke of Gloucester and his wife, Eleanor, nicknamed Nell, just so that Margaret can be the powerhouse on the throne. This raises the question of why does England even own territories in France, and why is the loss so tragic, and who is the Duke of Gloucester, and why do bitter enemies team together to get rid of him, and why do Salisbury and Warwick, York supporters, agree that York has a better claim to the throne? To answer these questions, we have to go back 4 centuries earlier to 1066 and look at 4 pivotal moments in time. This is when William of Normandy invaded England and became its next king without giving up his lands and territories in France. That'd be like the governor of Florida going over to Cuba, declaring himself or herself king or queen, and then still ruling Florida and still having allegiance to the United States. Over the next century, through a combination of wars and marriages, the English nobles gained even more control of France, rivaling the French king until, that is until King John of Robin Hood fame lost almost all of it through his disastrous decisions. He tries and fails to fix it by arranging a marriage with the French heiress, and the English have been struggling to win back those lands ever since. Fast forward another century or so to King Edward III. The year is now 1328, and an opening has appeared on the French throne with the death of Charles IV. Hearing the news, King Edward III of England gets out his easy-peasy family tree and says, "Oh look, my mother is a dead king's sister. Woohoo! I'm the closest male heir. Hand me another crown, I'll be King of France too." Meanwhile, his first cousin once removed, Philip, says, "Hey, you know, there's this really old and obscure Salic law we haven't used in 900 years. It says your mom can't inherit, so you can't inherit through her. My claim is through an all-male line, so it's more legit, cuz." So they decide to settle it like Ben, with Philip being crowned king in France, and Edward starting the 100 Years' War against France to dispute that claim. That's pivotal moment number 2. After about 2 decades of fighting, Edward decides, well, he's done well enough, and he settles for a treaty where he gives up his claim to the throne, but he keeps the land that he won. When Edward III dies, he leaves his crown to his grandson, Richard II, since his own son had died of dysentery a year earlier. Little Richie, at age 10, is obviously too young to go fighting in France, so while the cat's away, the mice will play, the mice being the next 2 kings, and France being a really big piece of cheese. Richard also marries a French bride, Isabella of Valois, to try and delay the mice from gobbling up those French territories. Little Richard II, however, makes a key mistake. He exiles his cousin, Harry Bolingbroke, the future King Henry IV, for treason, and here's the kicker and the third of these pivotal moments in time. He tries to claim Harry's lands and income so that Richard can fund his petty wars in Ireland. Harry, you see, is set to inherit the rich Duchy of Lancaster, one of the richest dukedoms in the country. And Harry replies, "Well, whoa, dude, kicking me out of the country, that's one thing. But don't you dare touch my allowance." So when the crowd goes wild and everyone's like, "Harry for king," Henry replies, "Okay, you twisted my arm, me?" And he forces little Richie from the throne in 1399 after winning the Battle of Shrewsbury. He is then crowned as King Henry, the 4th of that name, because, Henry sounds better than, more king-like than Harry. Henry IV then spends most of the plays Henry IV Parts 1 and 2 despairing over his young son, Prince Hal, who is hanging out with low-life rogues and criminals such as the aging, portly, cowardly, thieving, womanizing, drunkard Applejohn, Sir John Falstaff, and his friends. But when the Scottish and Welsh team up with rivals to Henry's throne, the young Prince Hal redeems himself and shows his military prowess, and then King Henry IV dies, leaving young Prince Hal as King Henry V. With all the infighting in England, by the time King Henry V ascends the throne in 1413, all of his great-grandfather Edward's lands are back to nothing, plus 2 small territories, Calais and here in Normandy. So Henry V takes his dad's deathbed advice, which was to attack France to keep the English from fighting each other, and he invades. He conquered most of France, including winning Paris, defeating the French king, winning the hand in marriage of the French Princess Catherine, sister to Richard II's queen, and getting the French king to disinherit his own sons in favor of King Henry's heirs to succeed to the French throne. And instead of taking hundreds of years to do it, he did it in a mere 7 years, including winning the famous Battle of Agincourt, where his starving, bedraggled, and severely outnumbered army employed better army diplomacy and decimated the French against all odds. It was like a fairy tale. There should have been English peace and prosperity for years, especially with so many French nobles too dead to interfere. But then here's a 4th and final moment, a pivotal moment, that at the height of all this power and glory, Henry VI dies of dysentery, which if you ever played Oregon Trail, that never gets old to say. And the French king also dies within 2 months as well, leaving a young 9-month-old King Henry VI on the throne of England, and Charles the Dauphin, a teenager, on the throne of France. The young Charles the Dauphin of France employs the help of 17-year-old Joan of Arc to help France win back territory after territory as the 100 Years' War continues, until she's finally captured and burned at the stake. And bickering and internal politics cause England to lose most of the rest of France, and this is all chronicled in Henry VI, Part 1. The play then ends by shifting once again from military diplomacy to bedroom diplomacy, when Henry VI grows up enough to sign a peace treaty and agrees to marry the French heiress Margaret of Anjou, because, you know, that tactic has always worked so well for them in the past. And that brings us back to Henry VI, Part 2. It also brings us back to the question of who are all of these rival players and where does everyone fit in? And to do that, we're going to take a look in Part 2 of this video at the Plantagenet family tree.